My boss fired me on stage and replaced me with the intern I trained. 3 years later, I quietly outbid his firm for a multi-million-dollar deal he bragged about on a podcast. You're not what we need anymore. They fired me in public, not quietly, not in a private HR meeting with awkward smiles and a severance package folder on the table. They did it on stage, with a microphone, in front of nearly 100 employees and a few high-profile partners. It was supposed to be our annual strategy summit. I'd spent weeks prepping my section of the presentation, outlining the growth trajectory, anticipated client expansions, and the digital overhaul I'd personally led over the past 2 years. I wasn't nervous. I was proud. I'd built this. Not alone, sure, but my fingerprints were on every campaign that had saved Roth and Lanning during the 2020 downturn. I'd turned down other job offers, pushed through late nights, said no to weekends, said yes to last-minute red-eye flights and 7 a.m. board meetings. All because Grant, our CEO, once looked me in the eye and said, "You're the future of this firm." So when I wrapped up my segment and looked out at the crowd, I was expecting maybe polite applause, or at the very least a nod from the senior execs. What I got instead was silence. And then Grant stood up. He took the mic from the side podium, smiled, and said, "That was interesting. But as of today, we're shifting directions." I blinked. Was that part of the script? He continued. "Sloan will no longer be leading our strategic vision. We're excited to announce a new chapter. One more aligned with where Roth and Lanning is going." It took me a few seconds to register what he'd said. Then I heard the gasps, felt the stillness, saw the confusion and relief in the eyes of a few team members. That's when Emily walked out. New black blazer, slick ponytail, holding the clicker like she owned the room. Emily, who 2 years ago was an intern I had personally mentored, who once asked if she could borrow parts of my pitch deck for a mock proposal, who never led a major campaign of her own, but always found ways to align herself with mine. She walked past me with a smile so bright it burned. Grant gestured to her like a proud father at a graduation. "Please welcome our new Director of Strategic Initiatives." I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. But I could feel the burn of 100 eyes on me as I collected my notes and stepped off stage. No one tried to stop me. No one even looked up. Even Mia, my closest friend at the firm, someone who used to vent to me on Friday nights over wine, just stared straight ahead. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She didn't defend me. I left the ballroom like a ghost. No one followed. By the time I reached the front desk, my security badge was already deactivated. I had to ask a temp assistant to unlock the office so I could grab my coat. That night, Roth and Lanning posted a 45-second recap video of the event. Grant on stage, Emily shaking hands. The caption read, "Roth and Lanning steps boldly into the future. A new era of leadership begins." My face, not even a frame. My voice completely erased. I didn't exist. It's funny how fast people rewrite the story when it suits them. I went from backbone of the department to not aligned with the vision in a single breath. And somehow, no one questioned it. No one asked why. But here's the part they didn't understand. I wasn't let go because I wasn't good enough. I was let go because I knew too much. Because I'd seen how decisions were made behind closed doors. Because I'd asked questions I wasn't supposed to ask. About bonuses that magically disappeared. About Emily's mysterious rise. About a certain client proposal that came with a side deal no one was supposed to mention. They thought by cutting me off, by humiliating me, they could protect themselves. They thought I'd disappear quietly. Maybe take a lesser job somewhere. Maybe post some on to new adventures update on LinkedIn and move on. They didn't realize they'd just made the biggest mistake of their careers. Because now, for the first time in nearly a decade, I had nothing tying me to Roth and Lanning. No NDAs, no loyalty, no illusions. They erased me to feel safe, but all they did was set me free. And I knew exactly where to start. I wasn't supposed to last long at Roth and Lanning. At least that's what Grant told me in my first interview. "You're impressive," he said, flipping through my resume with one eyebrow raised. "But this place? It breaks most people within 6 months." I smiled and replied, "Then I guess I'll give it 7. I stayed for 8 years. 8 years of skipping holidays, fixing other people's pitches at midnight, and stepping in whenever a team lead fell apart under pressure. I was the one who closed the Dawson Tech account when our head of client relations panicked and left mid-campaign. I was the one who saved Grant from a public meltdown when a keynote speaker canceled 30 minutes before an investor panel. I didn't just solve problems, I absorbed them. And at first I didn't mind. I was young, hungry, determined to prove I could keep up, even outrun the men who dominated the upper levels of the agency. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I stayed late enough, someone would notice, that he would notice. And he did, sort of. Grant called me reliable, sharp, a quiet force. He'd loop me in on private calls, ask for my advice before big meetings, let me speak to press off the record. But never publicly, never with credit. Always behind closed doors, in the shadows. Just enough to feel needed, never enough to be seen. When Emily joined as a junior strategist, I saw myself in her, at least at first. Eager, bright, just rough enough around the edges to seem harmless. She stayed after meetings to ask questions, complimented my slides, asked for my notes just to study structure. I helped her, shared my frameworks, rehearsed with her before her first client pitch. But over time, I started noticing things. Familiar phrases in her decks. My formatting, my language, my voice, but coming from her mouth. At first, I doubted myself. Then one day a client forwarded me a proposal Emily had sent. It wasn't inspired by mine, it was mine, word for word. I brought it to Grant, showed him timestamps, drafts, evidence. He barely looked at it, just shrugged and said, "It's a competitive environment. If you want recognition, you've got to fight harder for it." I didn't respond, but something in me shifted that day. A crack I could no longer tape shut. After that, Emily's rise accelerated, too fast. She landed lead roles I used to handle, got invited to private events I used to anchor, started skipping past me entirely, going straight to Grant like she belonged there all along. I told myself it was normal, that maybe she had something I didn't, but deep down I knew better. This wasn't about merit, it was about alignment, timing, leverage, and maybe something no one dared to name. 6 months before they let me go, I stumbled across a contract on the shared drive. A proposed partnership with a consulting firm known for dirty lobbying. The terms were buried deep, hidden in plain sight. It contradicted everything in the ethics statement we'd published a month earlier. I raised it carefully in a leadership meeting. If this goes through, I said, we need to make sure it doesn't contradict our public stance. Our investors will notice. The room went cold. Grant's face hardened. Later, he pulled me aside. "You're making waves that don't need to be made." That was it. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't being groomed for the future. I was being positioned to take the fall. Slowly, the walls started closing in. My name disappeared from pitch decks. I was left off calls I used to lead. My financial access was revoked. Nothing official, but unmistakable. It was a slow ghosting, the kind designed to make you doubt yourself, to wonder if maybe you're imagining things. Technically, I still had my office, my title. But inside, I was already being erased. And then came the summit. Public, precise, surgical. They didn't just fire me, they made an example of me. Thought they'd humiliate me into silence. Thought they'd buried me. But what they didn't know was I'd already started digging. Not a grave, an escape. A blueprint, something new, something mine. And this time I wasn't sharing it with anyone. I didn't post about it. No dramatic farewell, no vague status about new chapters or exciting adventures ahead. I didn't update my job title, didn't tell anyone where I was going because truthfully, I had no idea. For the first time in 8 years, I had nothing scheduled. No back-to-back meetings, no 11 p.m. emails, no Sunday night deck revisions. Just silence. It was deafening. At first, I tried to treat it like a vacation. I slept in, took long walks, watched people in cafes who didn't seem like they were constantly calculating ROI in their heads. But beneath that stillness was a constant thrum, like a phone vibrating in a locked drawer. Anger, not just at them, at myself, for staying too long, for trusting too much, for not seeing the signs until it was already too late. Some nights I'd replay that summit over and over in my mind. The way Grant had smiled while cutting me down. The way Emily had walked past me like she'd won something she actually earned. The silence of the room. That hurt the most. But something shifted in week 3. A random email showed up in my inbox subject line. "You probably don't remember me." It was from a guy named Leo, the founder of a tech startup I'd once helped for free. 2 years ago, he'd cold emailed Roth and Lanning asking for marketing guidance. We had passed on his project, but I'd taken an hour to meet with him anyway. I'd liked his product. It wasn't perfect, but it was smart, scrappy, and had heart. Now he wrote, "I heard what happened. If you're consulting or even thinking about something new, I'd love to pick your brain." I almost deleted it. But something about the timing, it felt right. I replied. The next week, we met in a tiny co-working space just outside San Diego. No fancy conference rooms, no assistants. Just him, a co-founder, and a whiteboard. They told me Canava, their company, was still alive, but barely. They had a solid user base, but they were bleeding ad spend and had no brand clarity. Their last pitch to investors flopped. They were 3 months from running out of money. I asked questions, listened, took notes. Then I asked to see their data, real numbers, not the polished decks, the raw stuff. And what I saw was potential. They had a real product, a community, a need. What they didn't have was positioning. And that, ironically, was something Roth and Lanning used to pay me 6 figures to create. I asked for 2 days. I went back to my Airbnb and built a framework overnight. New market entry angle, fresh messaging pillars, a cost-efficient acquisition strategy that didn't rely on throwing money at influencers. When I showed it to them, Leo just stared at me for a long time and said, "Why are you not running your own agency?" I smiled. Because I was too busy building someone else's. We talked numbers. They couldn't afford me full-time, but I didn't want a paycheck. I wanted skin in the game. So I offered this: I'd rebuild their entire brand and relaunch their next campaign if I got 30% equity decision-making power and full creative control. They hesitated. And then they said yes. That night, for the first time in a month, I didn't fall asleep out of exhaustion or frustration. I slept with a mind that felt electric again. Not because I had a title, but because for the first time, everything I built would be mine. Over the next few weeks, I became something between a CMO and a ghost. I rebuilt their customer journey, repositioned the platform, and turned their metrics upside down in the best way. I reached out to old contacts, not as Sloan from Roth and Lanning, but as a new entity entirely. Most were curious, some were skeptical, but a few took the meeting. And that was all I needed. And then one day, while researching potential investor overlap, I stumbled on a familiar name, Roth and Lanning. Turns out they had tried to acquire Canava the year before, offering pennies with an insulting clause about full creative control. Leo had declined. When I asked why, he said the woman I spoke to from their team gave me the worst pitch I've ever seen. Cold, cookie cutter, like she didn't even care. I asked what her name was. He frowned, trying to remember. Erica, no. Emily. That was it. I didn't react. I didn't smile, but inside something lit up. They didn't just try to erase me. They tried to buy the very thing I would one day rebuild. And now that thing was mine. They didn't know I was back. Not yet, but soon they would. Not because I'd announce it, but because I'd take what they wanted most, and I'd do it better than they ever could. Quietly, effortlessly, and with absolute precision. If you've spent long enough inside a system, you start to see its patterns even after you've walked away. Especially after you've walked away. 3 months into Canava's rebrand, things started moving fast. Campaign metrics were climbing. The customer base was growing steadily. People who once ignored my emails were now forwarding my name to decision makers. I wasn't using Roth and Lanning's tactics. I was using mine, the ones I'd built over years, but was never allowed to own. One morning, Leo forwarded me an RFP. Big name healthcare platform. 7-figure campaign. National reach. The kind of brief that could change the course of a company. Canava wasn't supposed to be ready for something that big. We didn't have the headcount, the pedigree, or the bandwidth. But we had something no one else did. Me. And the moment I opened the file, I recognized the layout. I'd written this template before. Not this exact one, but the structure, the priorities, the language. It was Roth and Lanning's. I turned to Leo and said, "They're bidding on this too, aren't they?" He blinked. "How did you?" I just smiled. Because I taught them how. For the next 10 days, I barely slept. We didn't waste time on polish. No cinematic videos. No agency theatrics. Just a pitch rooted in logic, data, and user understanding. But I went further. I built in friction points I knew Roth would overlook. I'd been in those rooms. I knew how they misread technical clients. They'd aim for flash. I aimed for precision. We sent the pitch 12 hours before the deadline. No fanfare, no hype, just strategy. While we waited, I walked the city with headphones in and my mind elsewhere. I wasn't nervous. I was remembering how many times I'd built the winning idea only to have it handed off to someone more polished. Usually a man. Lately, someone younger. Emily came to mind. So did Grant. I could picture them confident, unaware, assuming this one was already theirs. When the results came in, Leo called. No hello, just, we got it. I didn't speak for a moment, just closed my eyes, not out of disbelief, out of quiet satisfaction. Canava had won. Against Roth and Lanning. Against the firm I once helped save. They didn't know my name, but they knew my work. That was enough. Later that week, a vendor told me Roth had been blindsided. Grant had already told the board it was a done deal. They'd begun hiring. Emily had gone on a podcast and hinted at a major healthcare win. Then came the press release with Canava's name on it. Not mine. But my fingerprints were everywhere. And still I said nothing. No gloating, no leaks. Let them wonder. Let them guess. I didn't need applause. I needed positioning. That night I opened my laptop. Pulled up files I'd quietly collected over weeks. I'd been in talks with 3 of Canava's earliest investors. Good people, patient, but ready to move on. We negotiated off the record. Through a shell consulting firm I controlled. Clean, legal, invisible. By the end of the month, I'd owned 35% of Canava. Not publicly, not yet, but real, permanent, leveraged. Leo didn't know, not because I was hiding something, but because I wasn't done building it. Not yet. That same week, a new connection request came through on LinkedIn. No photo, no message. Just a username string and a corporate domain I knew by heart. Roth and Lanning. They were watching. And for the first time, I welcomed it. Because they didn't know what I was really doing. They only knew they'd just lost to me. And more importantly, they had no idea I was just getting started. Power doesn't shift in one dramatic blow. It tilts subtly, quietly, until the ground beneath your feet doesn't feel stable anymore. And by the time you notice it's already too late, that's exactly what was starting to happen at Roth and Lanning. And they had no idea. The healthcare contract had been a fluke in their eyes. They brushed it off, called it an off-cycle loss in internal meetings, blamed the client for unclear expectations. I knew the language. I'd written it into status reports myself back when I was still inside the machine. But underneath the PR-friendly spin, there was fear. Because something had shifted. A company no one had heard of, a startup with no awards, no high-profile clients, no Madison Avenue office had beaten them. And worse, they didn't know why. I did. At Canava, we didn't celebrate like we'd won the Super Bowl. We got to work. The new campaign needed execution, not applause. But what that win gave us was something harder to measure: momentum. Suddenly, other mid-sized clients started reaching out. Ones who'd been burned by legacy agencies. Ones looking for faster turnarounds, more attention, less arrogance. We weren't swamped, not yet. But the inbox no longer sat empty over the weekend. And every time we submitted a pitch, we felt stronger, sharper, like we belonged. Leo was thrilled. He kept saying things like, "We're really doing this," as if surprised it wasn't falling apart. I smiled, nodded. But inside, I wasn't surprised. I had built a machine like this before. The only difference now, this one had my name on it, even if no one saw it yet. Meanwhile, Roth was beginning to show hairline fractures. I had a friend, well, more of an ex-coworker who still worked there. She didn't know I was involved with Canava, but she liked to vent. Apparently, 3 major clients had downsized budgets. 2 directors had quietly left. And there was a rumor that Grant had been advised by the board to restructure the creative team. Translation heads were rolling. Emily, she said, had taken over several projects, but was missing deadlines. Honestly, my contact whispered, "I think she's drowning." I didn't say much, just listened, and filed it all away. At Canava, we kept building. 2 more regional accounts, 1 small nonprofit campaign, 1 early-stage SaaS rebrand. Not huge deals, but respectable. Enough to show consistency. Enough to start turning heads. I started noticing something new. Agencies I'd never heard of were suddenly mimicking our style. Phrases from our decks began showing up in other people's proposals. I'd been copied before, but this time I smiled. Because if they were copying us, it meant they were watching. And if they were watching, eventually they'd start asking who's behind this, not yet, but soon. Quietly, I continued building control. I didn't rush to appear on leadership pages or make investor announcements. That wasn't the game I was playing. I bought a few more small stakes in Canava, nothing flashy. Just enough to move me past the 45% line, still not a majority, but close enough to keep board decisions in check. Leo was still CEO on paper, but I signed off on every major move. He didn't mind. He trusted me. And to his credit, he kept the team motivated while I worked behind the curtain. One afternoon, a former Roth client reached out. Someone I'd worked with years ago. He asked if I was available for informal consultation for a rebrand. I said yes under my own name, not Canava's. We met for coffee. Halfway through the conversation, he leaned in and said, "I've heard Roth is scrambling. Emily's been sending decks that feel rushed, hollow." I didn't respond. Didn't need to. Then he added, "But this new company, Canava, they've been making noise. Fresh voice, sharp campaigns. You heard of them?" I sipped my coffee. "A little," I said. "They're doing good work." He nodded. "I think I'll give them a shot." That night I stood in front of my apartment window, looking out over the skyline. It was late. The city had quieted. And I thought to myself, this is how power returns. Not by storming the gates, but by slowly turning the tide until the castle starts crumbling from within. I hadn't stepped foot inside Roth since the day they fired me. I hadn't said a word to Grant, hadn't sent Emily a single signal. But I knew they were starting to hear my name. Whispers in hallways, questions in pitch meetings, maybe even a few awkward glances at internal reviews. They didn't know I was behind it yet, but soon. They'd realize that the silence they once dismissed was the one thing coming for everything they built. The email came late on a Tuesday, sent from a partner at Roth & Lanning, short, polished, desperate in all the ways professionals try to hide. They were interested in exploring potential synergies between our firms. They admired Canava's agility in emerging markets. They welcomed a conversation around collaboration and possible acquisition structures. In other words, they were sinking, and they thought we were their lifeboat. It had been nearly a year since they fired me on stage, since they stripped me of my title and handed it to someone who plagiarized my work. A year since they edited me out of the very company I helped save. And now they were knocking politely, of course, hoping I'd be too ambitious or too flattered to say no, hoping I wouldn't ask the real question, why now? Leo called me right after he saw the message. He sounded almost excited. "They want to talk. With us." Can you believe that I could? Because I'd seen the signs before he did. I just hadn't told him how many. "They're struggling," I said. He hesitated. "You think we should take the meeting?" I paused. "Yes, but not just any meeting. I wanted them in the room. The real ones? Grant, Emily, no assistants, no junior partners. If Roth & Lanning was finally ready to negotiate, they'd do it face-to-face with the person they thought they erased." We scheduled the meeting for the following week. A neutral location, a downtown conference suite in New York. Nothing flashy, nothing public. Leo would open. I would arrive later at exactly the right moment. Until then, I said nothing. Didn't hint, didn't warn. Let them walk in blind. The morning of the meeting, I dressed simply. Dark blazer, clean lines. Nothing too memorable until I spoke. I didn't need armor, I had position. When I entered the building, the receptionist handed me a keycard without asking. I took the elevator to the 28th floor, paused just outside the conference room. Inside, I could hear voices. Grant's, Emily's, Leo's. I waited. Let them settle. Let them start. Then I walked in. The moment was quiet but electric. Grant's voice trailed off mid-sentence. Emily blinked like her brain was still catching up to what her eyes were seeing. Leo smiled because he finally understood. I didn't sit right away. I took my time. Placed a folder on the table. Emily stood up. "Sloan, I didn't realize you were involved with Canava." I tilted my head. No one ever really realizes, do they? Grant cleared his throat. "Well, this is unexpected." I looked at him, not from where I'm standing. They tried to regain control. Offered numbers, percentages, partnership potential. They suggested keeping Canava independent in brand, but folded into Roth's infrastructure. Emily smiled like she was doing me a favor. Grant spoke like he still held the cards. I let them finish. Then I opened my folder. Inside, a full breakdown of Canava's growth over the past year, current projections, press coverage, and a letter of intent written not by them but by me. I slid it across the table. "Let's be clear," I said. "You're not acquiring us. You're being absorbed." The room went cold. Grant didn't blink. Emily looked like she was choking on air. I continued. "If you want your employees to have a future, you'll accept these terms. Your brand dissolves. Your leadership steps down. Key talent will be offered positions selectively." Emily tried to interrupt. "You can't be serious," I held up a hand. "I'm not here to relive anything. I'm here to close." Grant finally spoke. Low. Bitter. "You planned this." I met his gaze. "No. You did. The day you pushed me out." I stood, gathered my folder, and just before leaving I added calmly, "You built a company that erased people. I built one that remembers." Then I walked out. No anger, no satisfaction on my face, just clarity. Later that night, Leo texted me. They signed, every line, no edits, no negotiation. The news didn't make headlines. There was no dramatic press release. Roth and Lanning disappeared the same way they had dismissed me quietly, efficiently. And me, I didn't post about it, didn't send any emails, didn't call anyone. I just opened my laptop and got back to work. People always ask if I confronted them again. If I ever stood in front of Grant and Emily and listed out every deal they stole, every time they dismissed me, every late night I worked just to be passed over. They ask if I made them read the numbers, if I showed them the press coverage, if I sent them screenshots of their clients tagging my company, if I walked into a room full of their old employees just to watch them squirm. The answer is no, because here's what no one tells you about revenge: the moment you center it around someone else, you hand them power again. I didn't rebuild for them. I didn't rebuild to prove a point. I rebuilt because I refused to let them write the ending. They wanted me to vanish. And for a while I did. But while they celebrated their fresh start, I created something real, something resilient, something that couldn't be edited out of a LinkedIn video. After the acquisition, things moved quickly. We absorbed key talent, phased out the rest, quietly dissolved Roth and Lanning's brand from every corner of the market. It didn't make headlines. We didn't need it to. There's something deeply satisfying about silence, about power that doesn't raise its voice, about legacy that doesn't ask for applause. Grant last. I heard he took an advisory role at some crypto-adjacent consultancy. Emily deleted most of her public profiles. Rumor is she moved to a different city, teaching yoga now or something close to it. I didn't follow up. I didn't care. Because by then, I had already moved on. I moved Canava's HQ to a quiet office near the water. We kept things lean, smart. No flashy campaigns, no egos, no slides full of jargon. We became known for clean strategy, for solving real problems, and for protecting our people. I built the kind of company I used to wish existed, the kind I thought I had found at Roth until they proved me wrong. Funny how life works. Sometimes you don't get the apology. You don't get closure. You just get better. I kept my name off the masthead. Didn't need to be front-facing. Didn't need to be thanked. But every once in a while, someone would figure it out. A former client, an ex-employee, someone from the old world who connected the dots. They'd send a message. "Is it really you behind this? I always wondered what happened to you." I'd reply, "Nothing happened to me. I just stopped waiting to be chosen." There's a photo I keep in my office. It's not framed, not even visible to others. It's a still image from that day at the summit, me standing at the edge of the stage right after Grant announced my removal. I look small, out of place, forgotten. I keep it not as a reminder of pain, but of distance, of how far I've come. That version of me, the one gripping her folder, pretending she wasn't humiliated, she didn't disappear. She evolved. And in doing so, she became someone they couldn't ignore, couldn't silence, couldn't replace. Sometimes I still get questions. People ask why I never told my side of the story, why I never exposed them, why I didn't make noise when I had the chance. And the truth is because I didn't need to. I wasn't interested in revenge that made headlines. I wanted something better. I wanted control. I wanted peace. And I have it now. I didn't burn bridges. I built my own island. And then I stopped looking back. That's the thing about power. Real power. It's quiet. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't seek validation. It simply moves. And if you're not paying attention, you don't realize it's already behind you. Already signed the deal, already closed the door.